Forge the Narrative.
Hey everybody, welcome to Forge the Narrative. My name is Paul Murphy, your host. We have the Bell of Lost Souls podcast. This is episode 204. I'm joined tonight by Chris Morgan and Andrew Whitaker.
What's up, guys?
What's up, homies?
This segment is now sponsored by the Table of Ultimate Gaming. Their Kickstarter is live right now. You've probably heard about it and seen it on Facebook. It funded in about 5 or 10 minutes after going live. It is currently at $438, almost $439,000 with 629 backers at the time of this recording.
That's pretty impressive.
That's good. For those of you who don't know how Kickstarter works, that's incredible.
Yeah, it's a big number, but check out their video. So you can find it. Go to Kickstarter.com, and it's the Table of Ultimate Gaming. What they've really designed is they're calling it the Ultimate Game Table System, and it really is a system. It's got some pretty innovative ways to make your table modular to get lots of different uses out of it for lots of different games, and it looks real nice. Like it's very solid. Hear him talk about it. You heard him talk about it on the last show. Watch their videos. They've got their next stretch goal, which is a $500,000 level, where you have another option for wood finish. And my personal favorite so far, they actually, for one of the stretch goals, is a Cthulhu decoration pack. Even the way you decorate your table is somewhat modular. Well, it's incredibly modular. You can switch it out as you like, and one of those designs is Cthulhu based. So I instantly fell in love.
Yeah, you have kind of a soft spot for that which sleeps forever silent.
The star entities that will eventually devour us. What can I say? It's what I do. But again, check them out. They have several different pledge levels and a couple of different table sizes. But one of them is specifically designed for 40k, and it's got a 4x6 gaming surface. And I don't know if this wasn't very clear by the first time we said it, but it's the actual interior that is 4x6 in gaming. So if you wanted to play where you had a lip on your table and not just on the flat table surface, which you can get the add-ons to make it a completely flat table for whatever it is you want, the actual play surface, the recessed surface, is 4x6, which is, as you know, the size we play on.
That is great for all of you people who continually drop your dice on the floor or roll a dice off the table down to the floor. It's a life changer.
I think you're right. And I said, I cannot wait to see these and roll some dice on them. Check out everything they've got. Go ahead and get your pledge in now, or make a pledge without a reward that will give you an option to decide what you want after the Kickstarter is over with their Kickstarter manager software they've got. They were great to talk to. Going to continue to follow this Kickstarter over the life of the campaign and bring you updates. But I think it's pretty impressive at the dollar amount that they're at right now, the number of people that have gotten it, and that they're continuing to innovate with the product through the former stretch goals.
That's pretty cool. I mean, and with a name like Table of Ultimate Gaming, I feel like every time we say that, there needs to be some kind of explosion sound in the background.
I'm not that good at editing.
Oh, come on, Paul, step it up.
I will do what I can. This episode, we're actually recording right after, now we weren't there, but it's right after the studio preview at the Nova Open that's happening this weekend. And some pretty interesting things came out of that Games Workshop studio preview.
Yeah, there's some real exciting news. I mean, just watching the video that they put out for Necromunda, wow, that's like a side of 40k that I don't really feel like I've seen that cool before.
Facebook blew up. People tagging everybody about it, reliving some nostalgia from the original release, wanting to jumpstart their gangs again, get stuff on the table. Necromunda is going to be another way to play with some cool miniatures, and it was fun back then. If they've made any redesigns on it, it's going to be fun now.
I'm stoked.
Yeah, man. You can find the link to this full news release at the warhammercommunity.com site, warhammer-community.com. I mean, look, you know where it's at. But they also talk about some Shadespire stuff with releases. Now, the cool thing about Shadespire, even though, when we first started talking about it after Adepticon, it felt like it was a long way away. Well, now it's a reality. We can actually start kind of dreaming about it and thinking about what it's going to play. But they're bringing out the Oryx faction, and they're talking about how this is going to be also translate into some more Age of Sigmar releases for them, and things like the Death faction.
Some of the new Death model previews that I've seen, where it's very when it comes to Death, I'm not into the whole zombie theme I feel like it's overplayed. Can anyone else agree with me that, zombies is a bit overdone nowadays?
No.
All right, well, you're wrong. But skeletons, though, like cool-looking skeletal wraith-like figures, that's where it's at for me. And those really were just, they look so cool.
There's a Herald of Nagash figure they have previewed in this post, and I think it's safe to say this will become a Chaos or Demon Sorcerer for me. They also give a quick little tease about Chapter Approved, how it's going to include expansion stuff for Apocalypse, giving some planetary invasion things, new missions, which we know about. The missions are going to come with these rules about altering the Go First mechanic, which we played with at a tournament this past weekend, and it does exactly what it says what it does, but maybe it is the more fair way of doing it.
The Chapter Approved thing is just such an important development. Myself and one of the other guys at the tournament, obviously Paul and I played in the same event this weekend, and we were talking about Chapter Approved, and we basically said, we were talking about how the fallback mechanic, it really, because of how easy it is to leave combat, that's a punishment for assault-based lists. And we were having this kind of, I don't know, existential conversation about 8th edition generally. And he said, well, yeah, there's just no way. Like, it doesn't really matter. Like, this is 8th, and it's not going to change. And I said, well, that's not true. I mean, I think that Games Workshop is fully capable of changing mechanics to improve the competitive game, match play specifically. And he said, what are you talking about? And we were talking about, well, Chapter Approved. That's a new thing where they're going to update the rules every year. And I mean, he must have looked at us like we had 16 heads and were wearing Slaneshi tunics that covered nothing. And we were just like, yeah, like the Games Workshop is going to hear us and adjust the rules every year and issue Chapter Approved to update the rules.
Yeah, based on substantiated feedback from people, and if there's a need, then they've proven they're going to push it and make changes.
That's a huge deal.
There may be things like, now match play rules fundamentally changes some core things of the game. We know that, but I guess it is good to really process that, internalize that. But then we may see things like with the Dark Eldar, where they have units that prevent things from falling back. So, maybe that's one of the ways that they get to push hardcore dedicated assault things in the future. Like, wouldn't it be great if the Death Company got you so wrapped up in the fray of combat that you could never pull away or something?
Yes, yes.
I mean, that would be awesome. In this article, there's a little bit of a teaser that says that we're going to trial some new rules that allow you to design your very own Land Raider variants and that thing. And that's for open play stuff. And then it says finally that for factions that don't have codexes yet, there'll be expanded rules for them. So, maybe you'll get your wish with some units. We don't know. We're only reading what is in the article. But that was the only news. We get a little bit of teaser about what codexes are coming up after the Death Guard and the Adeptus Mechanicus, which we know will be happening sometime in September. The article goes on to say that some Xenos factions are finally going to get some love. We're going to see something for Craft Worlds and Tyranids, and then it also says Astra Militarum. So what we're going to talk about today is how to beat Astra Militarum, or maybe our suggestions about how to beat the style of Astra Militarum that we've been playing. So I have to imagine that a lot of what we're talking about will remain, I guess, true even after a codex comes out. But, you never know. If we are describing things that are just too crazy to you with stats on vehicles or things like that, there's a codex coming. It might alter the way things are played.
I think might is probably a little bit too much of a conservative guess on what I imagine is going to come with the Guard Codex.
It's good. Look, I don't want anything we're going to ever talk about ever misconstrued. It is good to have powerful units in the game. You can even push it to some will seem, like they are too good, but that's still not a bad thing all the time.
Yeah, powerful units are one thing. I don't want to get us derailed here too much. But I feel like I can say this with conviction and with authority when I say I've lost one game of 8th edition. And it's not because I'm a tactical genius. I'm not. I'm a slightly above average 40k player. But Imperial Guard are they're fundamentally mispointed in the same way that like 6th edition Eldar were, when you had like the wave serpent spam. And so
Right.
the reason I think that right now I have so much more hope for 40k is because GW is listening to that fact.
Yeah, fair.
I hope that even as a guy who owns a 40k army, and as a guy who like literally won a 40k tournament this weekend playing Guard, like I hope GW hits Imperial Guard with the Nerf bat, and I hope to hit him hard.
Because we'll see. That's a topic for some other time.
For sure.
There's more in this article. This article also goes to say they're going to have a new promotion program for people that are out there kicking the bricks, supporting the hobby, being Warhammer heroes. Again, the gist here that you can nominate people in your community that are good stewards and I guess ambassadors of the hobby. And if GW likes the story, or there's enough corroborated reports, they're going to get a little medal that says Warhammer Hero.
Life goals.
I think that's pretty darn cool.
Yeah, that sounds real cool. I don't think trying to think of some of the other things that they may have done in the past. Paul, you still have your old badge, right? Didn't they hand out like a little card or something
there was a tournament registration ID card.
Right.
I think I still have that.
In my experience with Games Workshop, that I've seen something like this happen before. Am I remembering it correctly, Paul? This
is brand new. I mean, this is about community involvement, recognizing your fellow hobbyist and saying that dude is doing something good. I mean, as far as I know, I don't, there's no real details about the program here. I'm just going down the quick report. I mean, this, at the time of our recording, this article has been up for 45 minutes, and I haven't really had time to digest it, but it seems to be a way to recognize your peers in the environment.
That's really cool, and it's a good way to encourage people to be positive.
Yeah. I think this is a good thing for that, and it'd be cool to see how this develops. So that's the news, and that is some really cool news. I'm glad that they're at that tournament doing that, similar to what they did at Adepticon. Nova's going to be going on this weekend. By the time you hear this, the Invitational may have already run its course, and people are going to be playing games in the open. You know, these types of things always shift the meta a little bit, where people build their list off of what had success at the previous tournament, and that's interesting to see. I'm going to be interested to see what comes, if there's any kind of tech that we haven't discovered yet that comes out of this.
It'll be interesting to see, as kind of Paul pointed out, especially as more and more tournaments allow the Forge World options to come into play. Obviously, with 8th edition, we had this whole new transference of rules, whole new codices, all the index options, etc. And then the Forge World options and their interplay with what we understand the index options to be is an interesting one. So,
we're still very early. I mean, we're very early in the edition.
It's so early. Yeah, exactly. We're 2 months into this edition.
And now, granted, we've read all the books and we know what they mean and stuff, but as the new things come out, it's always different ways to shift the pie around. And anyway, can't wait to see what happens after this comes out of this tournament, to see what lists do well, and if there's anything that, sneaks in there is something we didn't think about before. Well, let's get to the meat of things here. We mentioned that we're going to talk about what we think is the right way to beat Guard, or go about approaching a Guard engagement on the last episode. And we haven't really hashed this out before we started to talk about it. So I think it's going to be kind of neat to see how, if we all think the same thing here.
It's important to kind of lay some groundwork anecdotally about what we've experienced in 8th, especially because Paul and I are both Guard players, and then just to kind of give this ecumenical, hey, no matter whether you believe, whether the three of us are good 40k players or not, whether you can dismiss our opinions, fine, but just in the grand scheme of things, here's some Guard advice and how to fight them, how to beat them, and what makes Guard good, because on its face, Guard is super powerful.
Yeah, it just has a lot of quality things that they can buff in lots of different ways.
Exactly. You have to game plan for it.
Yeah, and so the strength of Guard is that they have inexpensive quality units that have reliable functions.
Yeah, 1,000%. And there's things you can do from the list design stage all the way up through the tactical maneuver stage of like round one and turn one, turn two of your matchup. At every stage of your combat against guard, there's things you can do to improve your odds. And it's one of those situations where we're not recording this to like toot our own horns or be like, oh, guard is blah, blah, blah. We're not trying to hype them up. I mean, I feel like anyone who's listening to the show fully appreciates the fact that in 8th edition, Imperial Guard are a problem. If you go to a tournament, you better anticipate playing guard because they're going to be at the top tournaments. You're going to play them in round 2, round 3, and at GTs you're going to play them in round 3, 4, 5.
You're not making it through a tournament in the short term anyway without playing a guard player.
And that's exactly right. So you are behooved to make a plan.
Yeah.
Like game plan for it.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's just take it this way. How many points in your list are in tanks?
You and I just played an RTT. You and I both went 3 wins, 0 losses. So you and I this weekend were combined 6 wins, no losses.
We didn't play each other.
The
top 3 people did not play each other.
Exactly. So that's just kind of the luck of the draw in a 26-player tournament. But there was no doubt going into it, or rather coming out of it, that it made sense that you and I were both top 3. We won. Guard was in presence. It was there, and it was dominating. And so I think that's probably happening across the country. Paul, ask your question again.
Well, I wanted to know about how many points in tanks that you took. Because I know we have different ideas about which tanks to take, but I felt like we had about a similar number of points in armor.
So my list is particularly a foot guard list.
But you still had 4 mana cores is where I'm going.
For sure. So I have 4 mana cores. No. Make no mistake.
But this is where I'm going. It's like the points in tanks for the amount of tanks that you get is not a lot. You're already efficient.
That's certainly true. I just think for our listeners, I think Andrew Whitaker leans towards the foot heavy lists, and I have 4 mana cores, which comes around about 500 points in just missile tanks. And then my list this weekend had 5 Sentinels, which I kind of lump into the tank category. You're paying for armor there. So I had 5 Sentinels and 4 Manticores. That was the sum total of my units that would have had armor values in 7th edition.
That sounds pretty good. I had 2 Basilisks, 2 Wyverns, and 2 Manticores with 5 Sentinels also. Sorry, 4 Sentinels. 4 Sentinels.
Sentinels are so powerful. And Paul and I, both of us, are bringing Scout Sentinels. The amount of board control you can achieve with a... let me ask you this, Paul. I assume you were taking las cannon Sentinels.
I did. There were 4 Scout las cannon Sentinels, who I also had backed up by Harker.
Okay, so I had 5 Sentinels, las cannons, and hunter killer missiles.
Ooh, big spender.
Big spender. It's 6 points a model.
Right.
So, right.
That's what I'm saying. They're so point efficient. So this is that in and of itself is just a big I guess tilt towards why guard are so good right now.
Oh, certainly. I mean, it goes without doubt that Andrew spent an extra 36 points, or 30. I spent an extra 30 points giving all of my Sentinels hunter killer missiles. Whoop-de-doo, right? In terms of overall point expenditure, but in terms of utility, I do think given the Scout Sentinels is worthwhile for them to have hunter killer missiles. But overall, I think that any listener can take away from this the fact that between the two of us, we're taking Scout Sentinels 99 times out of 100. Yeah. They are so useful.
Yeah, I built a brigade is what I built, as we talked about last week or whatever. So the Scout Sentinels would have been there anyway, even if I wasn't just filling fast attack slots.
It's 61 points the way I run them for a las cannon and a hunter killer missile.
Yeah, but 55 with just a las cannon.
Correct. But the real reason that they're so valuable is because of the scout move. It is essentially a middle finger, is a one-upsmanship. It's a total trump card to be played on anyone who's trying to achieve a turn 1 assault. Or even Alpha Legion, for example, who's trying to get close to you to maximize shooting or to get an assault off. And Paul, I don't know how your games that went this weekend, but at least one occasion this weekend, and it has happened a bunch of times previously. At the beginning of my turn 1, I scout move all my Sentinels such that they move 9 inches per turn. The Scout Sentinels do.
Yeah, so you get a free 9-inch move before the game starts.
Yeah. Before I attempt to seize.
Yeah, which is great. Where you can get up from behind some line of sight cover if you wanted to. If anybody's trying to play, if you're playing Hammer and Anvil and they're somehow out of range of your last cannons, you can move them up.
Exactly. There's a whole bunch of great options in terms of if I have the first turn, I can get behind line of sight blocking. I can give myself advantageous cover. I can maximize my range. There's a whole bunch of reasons why it's good, kind of on the base intrinsic level. But then on the counter assault level, that's where Scout Sentinels really get their points, because I deploy them as far forward as I could possibly get, and then I move them 9 inches forward. And then if you're playing Gene Stealer Cult, Blood Angels, any of those armies that are predicated upon infiltration, deep strike, turn 1 assaults, etc.
You do actually roll the C's first before this moves. I don't know if that affects what you're saying here.
It is advantageous, I think, to the guard player who. It's after the seize roll, which means I absolutely know who is going first, right?
Yes.
That informs my move.
Yeah, that's exactly right. You know who's going first, so after the seize roll is done, so you... Yeah.
Exactly. Beyond any shadow of any doubt, I know who is going first, and that's going to inform my moves. To make a long story short, if you have these Scout Sentinels, you can zone out very convincingly anybody who's going to threaten you turn 1, because I move 9 inches off of my deployment zone, and then anyone who's going to deep strike, infiltrate move is going to be 9 inches away from me, which means at best case scenario, especially for a guard player, best case scenario, my opponent is going to be 18 inches away from my gun line. Right, Paul? I think you would echo that.
Yeah.
Right?
Oh, yeah. Everything you're saying is good. So, but that's okay.
Yep.
That's the issue. That's what guard are doing. Sorry. Go ahead, Chris.
Yeah, I was just agreeing that, especially coming from the perspective of that army that wants to, in some cases, beta strike, where you have units in reserve that are supposed to come down and do damage, and where if you're designing your list to do damage in combat instead of shooting, those screening units, those buffer units, really screw with your battle plan.
It's a momentum shift. It's a huge momentum shift. So
and it's something that you have to either work around or get through. And who wants to waste a big squad of deep strike assaulters, or say Raven Guard infiltrate assaulters, or Chaos Alpha Legion infiltrate assaulters? Who wants to waste that on a Scout Sentinel?
To sum up Andrew's point, I think, is that you're establishing that guard can set the tempo for combat or for the game, which makes their guns from long range even more powerful, because you're now having to fight an extra round by them sacrificing 110 points worth of what could be potentially garbage units.
Yeah, I mean,
I shouldn't say garbage, throwaway units.
I think that's kind of the important. Maybe I spend more time than I should have of our listeners' time talking about why Scout Sentinels are good, but it kind of it sets the table for how people should target prioritize for playing against guard, because the whole point of this section is to say, how do you deconstruct and how do you beat guard? And I don't think you can fully appreciate how to deconstruct and how to defeat Imperial Guard until you understand what they do.
Well, anyone who is setting the tempo on you're not playing your own game at that point. You're now playing their game. So I think the thing to address is, how do you wrest back control from someone that's trying to do this to you in the game?
That is so well said, and it is so important to understand that. And if you're a Forged Narrative listener who has tuned out rambling Andrew Whitaker a number of times, that's fine. But hear me when I say this: when you're playing against Imperial Guard, the first impulse always see is that those Scout Sentinels are so good at what Paul just said. They're so good at setting the tempo. They set the table, and they control the board in such a dynamic way on turn 1 and turn 2 that my opponents consistently overvalue them and that they shoot at those Sentinels. And on turn 1s and turns 2, at ATC I saw this all the time. They are so stifled by those Sentinels that they say, well, I need to kill those Sentinels. And this is, if you take away nothing from Andrew, listen to me on this one. After they scout move, and after they're into the board, and after they board control and zone out those deep strikers and the first turn alpha strikes, their purpose is largely done. They have largely served their purpose, and they've earned their points back as far as I'm concerned.
A last cannon on 4s at that point is without any buffs. Now, again, if I'm allowed to, or the game says I can, I'm going to create like a little mobile fire base with them. But if I can't do that, a Sentinel out there hitting on 4s with a damage that has the range output between 1 to 6, wounding lots of things on 3s is not a lot of damage.
It's basically no damage. I mean, you've hit the nail exactly on the head.
So you can, after they've done their job, you don't have to waste precious time trying
or energy
to take
killing them.
I mean,
that's it. They just ignore them.
And if you're playing a kill point game, they are easy kill points. They've got 6 wounds. Not an armor save that's not insurmountable, but you could pick them up almost at any time. I think what you're suggesting here is don't get rope-a-doped by the Sentinels. You need to strike right at the big guns of the Guard, and that will be the Manticores and the Basilisks.
That is exactly right. The Sentinels are so dominant at zone control, area control, and to kind of quadrant out those turn 1 assault armies.
They can assault something and force it to fall back.
Exactly.
And so, I mean, you could assault something that needs its full firing capacity.
Exactly right.
On your opponent's turn with a 9-inch move. I mean, they are great. They are a standout unit. I love Sentinels. But after they've done that, ignore them.
Ignore them. And what I have seen consistently, game in, game out, is that my opponent sees these Sentinels and is thwarted by them. They see, I can't move here, I can't deploy there. And then they see these Sentinels that says, well, these Sentinels have a las cannon and a hunter killer missile. They seem dangerous. Let me kill these things. And my opponents consistently overestimate the value of these Sentinels such that they destroy them. And they don't shoot at the Manticores, they don't shoot at the veterans, they don't shoot at all the other things in my army that are going to ultimately win the game.
The Sentinels, they're like a big flashing red light. They've got a couple of things going for them. They're annoying, and they look like they're probably easy to kill.
That's exactly right. You've absolutely accurately described them. There are these big flashing red lights that screwed you on turn 1. You couldn't land your deep strikers where you wanted them because of the Sentinel. And so the impulse is to just blow them up and kill them. And because they have las cannons and hunter killer missiles or whatever, you think that you're doing enough damage. But the reality is, ignore them.
Yeah.
Shoot at other things. And so that ultimately is why we're talking about this conversation, why we're having this debate, why we're having this episode. How do you beat Imperial Guard? And I think threshold number 1 is don't get caught up in the Sentinels. They are a pain in your butt, and they're gonna thwart your deep striking and everything else like that. But please don't kill them. I mean, I had this Saturday, for example, I played against a guy who had a number of Imperial flyers, three Storm Ravens and a Fire Raptor, and then rowboat. I went first. I killed the Fire Raptor, and that's good for me. And then his turn 1, he killed 5. He just killed all my Sentinels. They were all dead. And I was like, that's great, but you've missed the point. I mean, Sentinels and to do the math is important.
Manticores kill Storm Ravens. I mean, that's
Manticores kill Storm Ravens. Sentinels do not, right? I mean, take for example, if you have 6 Sentinels, right, and they hit on 5s, that's 3 hits. And then they wound on 3s. That's 2 wounds. And then you save on 4s. That's one gets through.
Well, if it's a las cannon, are you talking about shooting at the Sentinel or the Sentinel firing?
I'm saying if you have 6 Sentinels and they're shooting at something with a 4-up invuln save.
Oh, got it. A 4-up invuln. Okay, yeah, I'm with you. I was going to point out that even like power armor gets a 6 save versus a las cannon.
And that's an important point. If you have 6 Sentinels and they're shooting at something with a 4-up invuln, on average, they do 3 wounds a turn. That's nothing. That's nothing.
On the coin flip,
shoot them out.
All that value. I'm not trash talking the Sentinel because there are going to be some turns where those 4 Sentinels do 24 wounds to something.
Yeah. There's no doubt.
I haven't played that game. I don't know what that feels like to do.
Yeah.
But that's that can happen. But they perform so many functions for that 55 to 61 point investment.
No doubt. I'm just saying that if you're playing against Guard, right, you're already fighting uphill because of all the reasons why Guard is what it is.
The amazing efficiencies.
My point is that if you're going to fight against Guard armies, don't get preoccupied. My tip note, we have 5 keys to beating Guard. Number 1 is don't get preoccupied with Sentinels. They are on average wildly inefficient. And they're
streaky. They're very streaky.
They're streaky.
I know the variance is huge.
The variances are huge. But I would play those dice. Don't go off and kill Sentinels because you're much better off killing the things that are far more consistent.
Even if you're shooting bolters.
Exactly right.
Yeah, and that's one thing that I kind of want to bring attention to Buddy and your guys is if there's nothing better to shoot at, yeah, go ahead and shoot at them. But target priority seems to be like a really big part of what you guys are saying needs to be reevaluated when facing against some of these units. And granted, like if you're going to be that one guy in the one game where the Sentinel with the las cannon is the one that manages to take down your really important linchpin unit, linchpin big model, then you're going to be like, you guys just gave me the worst advice ever. Like, I'm always killing the Scout Sentinels first from now on. So unless you're that guy, and that's your destiny, rest in peace, friend, you've got to make sure that you're putting the shots against the things that are going to hurt you the most. And the Sentinels are not it.
Yeah.
Now,
they've done their job, yeah.
As an
That's
opponent,
exactly right.
For me coming in and being the guy, I'm the guy right now, right, who's brought the Alpha or Beta Strike, Deep Strike Assault Army. I'm wanting to do the damage. I'm up against this Guard list. All of my Alpha Strike opportunities or Beta Strike opportunities are screwed up by these Scout Sentinels. What do you recommend that I do to mitigate how my plans are disrupted?
Did you bring obliterators?
Me? No, I wouldn't. I wouldn't have brought obliterators. I think that question answers itself.
Right.
Again, we're speaking from a combat perspective, at least in this case, because if you're deep striking and shooting, you're going to have range.
So that's so important. I mean, and that's a great question, and that kind of touches into the point 2 of the 5 ways to be Imperial Guard. You said, well, I've been thwarted. The Sentinels have disrupted my Deep Strike, Alpha Strike.
And you could do the same thing with 120 conscripts if you were going that route too. You could disrupt the Deep Strike, make it very difficult to do. So when that first turn disruption from that type of assault happens, what do you do next?
Yeah, and I think that this kind of gets into the list design stages, right? This is not a tabletop tactic.
You've got to plan for that. If you're going to try to win a tournament, or you're going to go over to your buddy's house and he's a Guard player, you need to plan on playing the Guard, and part of that is bringing the tools that will get you there. And I'm not saying you list tech just for Guard. I'm saying that even back in 3rd edition, when I was first starting going to tournaments, I knew that I was going to face XYZ army on my path to victory. I had to bring tools that dealt with them.
You have to list design expecting to play Guard. You can't just show up and be like, oh, I'm just going to avoid them, right? And so from a list design level, you have to account for what those lists are going to be doing.
Yeah, and people are going to play Guard. This is no secret. Guard's an army that's been around forever, and people have the toys. You're going to see it. So I think this is a very relevant conversation. So after the first round has gone down, Guard are now playing their game. How do you start taking back control and getting Guard to play your game?
Yeah, and I think it comes down to 2 things. First is a target priority game, and then second is a assault game. Namely, you have to present for guard a "what am I going to shoot at" question. I think Chaos players have the best situation for this, but allow me to expand. Essentially, guard has this incredibly overwhelming firepower. They are very point efficient. They put out a tremendous amount of really efficient shooting.
Like, I'm bringing Basilisk. Basilisk, though, their firing profile is you roll 2d6 and pick the highest, and that's the number of shots you get. So you're effectively getting, a handful of high-powered shots across the table every round.
Point of story is that I think that guard is wildly efficient for its points.
Yeah. Okay. So, like, how does a player now? You mentioned that that Chaos has more effective units because they've got some efficiencies too. You can get a heck of a lot of demons for 70 points, 140 points. I mean, you can just but. Is the secret just simply having more units on the table? I don't think so. I think you got to have some efficient units of your own that are able to either reach out and touch from a long way away, or somehow get past this barrier of Sentinels and or conscripts and start really threatening the tanks. So how do you threaten the tanks that are the real damage outputters after they've already backed you up into your deployment zone?
I'm scared of two things. Number one is my opponent's capacity to get into assault. And then number two is and this is kind of more a large scale picture kind of concern, is my opponent to understand how to target prioritize. With regard to number one, if they can get into assault with my manticores, the game is over. I lose. If you can get bodies to my manticores, I lose, because I rely so heavily on their shooting and how efficient they are that...
Well, they crack open vehicles, they allow small arms fire,
they're so good. They
basically do everything.
I think the same could probably be said for a Basilisk or whatever your fire base unit is, right?
Yeah, yes, absolutely. Like, Paul and I have had this joke, Chris is privy to it, we all have this joke. I do not like Basilisks. Okay, so what? But if you're bringing Basilisks, if you think that they're better than Manticores, so be it. All the same, they suffer from the same issue in that if a Demon Prince flies over your screening unit and has a place to land, and then makes a 5-inch charge into your Manticores and or Basilisks, that's it. The game's over. Because then you don't get to shoot with them next turn. They're going to fall back out of combat, and they're going to be...
Or hitting on sixes because they got beat up.
Exactly.
That's something we haven't necessarily talked about yet, is because, or is that you can damage these things, and every pip on that die greatly affects what their actual damage output is. And so if you are able to shoot, and I was saying even before, if you're able to shoot even bolters at a tank, as opposed to a Sentinel or, name something, a Chimera, anything. The priority is the heavy support options shooting at them, even if you're shooting with bolters, to get them, to weaken them, eventually remove them from the table.
Yeah, it's so true. And that's kind of what precipitated my mentioning Chaos as the kind of, arch nemesis of Guard to begin with, because it says, as soon as you force Guard to take diminished shooting, like Paul just said, every time you change one of the pips on the die roll, you're massively changing the outcome of victory. And so for Chaos right now, because of the Changeling and how popular that model is,
Neg 1 to hit.
Neg 1 to hit is huge.
I mean, it's demon models, or Tzeentch demon models.
Tzeentch demon model for sure, but it just takes a Manticore. When a Manticore is doing on average 7 shots, hitting on 4s, the math is very good. As soon as the Manticore is doing an average of 7 shots, hitting on 5s, it suddenly becomes wildly less impactful. And so forcing those units to be at a shooting disadvantage and or forcing them to move and locking them in combat is huge. And that harkens back to our original point, that is how to beat Guard. ignore the Sentinels, and shoot at the firebase.
And also smite. Smite's another tool. Things have to be, that you can't target. The smite has to be the closest thing. Make sure that if you have the option of being next closer to it or something else, always choose it. So you put a few extra wounds on there. That's
exactly right. I mean, I think that it's important. So I hate to overwhelm listeners with math hammer. That's bad radio, #bad radio, but just kind of from a holistic perspective, consider this. 6 Sentinels on average deliver 1.3 D6 of damage. That is, we get 1.3 wounds through, and then it's a D6 of damage. Okay, 6 Sentinels. That's really bad. If you have 6 Manticores, it delivers something like 7d3 damage.
7.3 wounds.
7.3.
That turn into
it's 7
D3
wounds.
Damage.
Exactly. It's like something like 6.9 wounds that turn into D3 damage per wound. And so the amount of damage that these things deliver, the Manticores, the Basilisks deliver, is wildly ahead of the Sentinels. And the variance on that is huge. I mean, 7d3 can be 21 or it can be 7, right?
Even the average, that's still 11, 12 wounds, and that degrades or kills most things.
It definitely degrades or kills most things. And so if you're playing against guard, your focus should be on eliminating the things that can do the most damage to you at the highest variance levels.
And how do you do that? You got to throw things down range at them. You got to be in position to do the smites. If you have the option of shooting at anything or that, always choose that tank. Let's take a quick break, and then we'll come back and talk more about this, and then get into a finishing move segment.
Sounds good.
You're listening to Forge the Narrative.
Hey everybody, we are back. I'm still Paul. I got Andrew and Chris.
What's up, homies?
Don't let your guard down.
This weekend, I'm going to be at Dragon Con. That's a big old nerd convention here in Atlanta. Going to be about me and 80,000 of my closest friends, all reveling in a bunch of sci-fi and geek stuff. I can't wait. I've been going for a really long time, and it's always an amazing time. And it takes place between a bunch of connected hotels. You never even have to hit the street if you don't want to. Tons of people in costume, and I'm not kidding about 80,000 people. It's a ton of folks.
That sounds like a party. Are you cosplaying again this year? Or are your kids cosplaying?
No, this year time got away. I say I'm going to do something every year, and I have done it for the kids the last couple of years. But this year we're just going down as some normies. Although speaking about letting your nerd and your geek cred broadcast to the world, I think we're going to be picking up some fan kicks pretty soon, and I believe we should be repping some Blood Angel stuff.
Oh yeah, Carl says they help you roll better, and if my game last night taught me anything, is I need magic shoes to help me roll better sometimes.
Well, I saw they had a Death Guard design, and we expect some Death Guard pretty soon. So I'm gonna show up with a almost a throw up, but that's I think I'm gonna leave it in because that's almost appropriate. But
I'm just the most thing I'm excited about is to leave these shoes around the house the way my wife leaves shoes around the house. And we're like, oh yeah, you want to leave your 4-inch, like your 2-inch pump wedges from your work around the house? Cool. Here are my Blood Angel shoes. Deal with it.
Yep. Just gonna, someone start playing the Bee Gees and walk into the hobby store with like a boombox on our shoulder.
The stuff's officially licensed. It's officially licensed Games Workshop, by Games Workshop. Warhammer gear. And, whatever. I don't mind showing up completely themed and outfitted to the local tournament.
Yeah, every time I show up to a tournament, I wear my Forge World Blood Angel shirt, the Legion shirt.
Yeah, heck yeah.
Yeah, got a rep, man.
We're talking about how to beat guard right now, though, and I know Andrew's got his 5-point treatise, and we covered a couple of those points, and I think we talked a lot, but I think it was all very important stuff because it's really cementing, and those first two things are the foundations, I think, of being successful against guard. So, Andrew, if you wouldn't mind, run down all the points, and we'll talk a little bit about them, and then in future shows we'll go way more in depth on some of those things if they continue to be the menace that they are.
What I want to convey is that ultimately, guard is a problem, and you have to account for them. And so whether you take our advice or someone else's, what you cannot do if you want to show up to a tournament and win it is not game plan for guard. And so my 5 points are these, right? Okay, and we'll break them down. Item number 1, ignore the Sentinels. My talking point is ignore the screen and then I have in parentheses the Sentinels. Ignore them. They are not the thing that's doing damage to you. They're the ones that is going to they're going to frustrate you, and they're going to thwart your turn 1 plans, and it's going to be frustrating, but that's not what's going to hurt you late in the game. And so largely ignore them. The math on Sentinels is that they're not going to do a ton of damage. Conscripts do basically nothing offensively, so just ignore them. They exist for a reason, but offensively, that should not be your target priority. That's number 1. Number 2, after you ignore the screen, shoot the manticores. That's
with anything. Throw crack grenades, bolters, pistols.
Las pistols, exactly. What Paul just said hit the nail on the
mind bullets.
Whether it's manticores or basilisks or the fire base, whatever it is, shoot the fire base for guard. I see this, and I've played probably 25 games of 8th edition, and what I consistently see is people getting distracted by the shiny things, whether it's the Sentinels or the veteran squads or whatever it is in my army, or the Rough Riders, etc. People get distracted, and they don't realize that the manticores or the fire base, the basilisks, the manticores, the wyverns, that's what's doing the damage. Focus in and blow those mother fathers up. If you've got 3 Storm Ravens, shoot all of the missiles and the multi-meltas and the assault cannons at the manticores. Kill them all. Shoot at the fire base. That's number 2.
Yeah, you can wrap up the Sentinels after everything else is dead.
That's exactly right.
Casually kill them in assault after you've already shot at the manticores. I mean, you could do that. Manticores, basilisks, wyverns. The wyverns did a lot of work for me. Again, another one of those point efficient things. Really good stuff. Point 3.
Point 3, lock them up. And I know that seems so simplistic, and it's very easy to say, difficult to execute. But what I consistently see is that people don't fully appreciate, because you can just fall back, blah, 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 especially with guard. That doesn't undersell the fact that if you can just touch them in the assault phase, it shuts down the shooting.
Even if you consolidate into them.
Even if you consolidate, exactly. It shuts down the shooting in subsequent shooting phase for vehicles. These are not infantry squads that can be ordered to, quote, get back in the fight. Manticores, basilisks, wyverns, hellhounds, baneblades. Baneblades different category, but
Baneblade can move out and shoot.
Quite so. All of these, the basic run-of-the-mill vehicles, if you can touch them, even if you consolidate into them, that's it. You've accomplished your mission. They can't shoot at you in the subsequent shooting phase, and that is that's the whole point, because you can kill them and they can't kill you back.
You're starting to gain back some of that tempo that you lost earlier in the game.
That's exactly right. The unfettered shooting of Imperial Guard armies is going to cripple and destroy you. But if you can touch them and get into combat with them, that's how you win. And that's massively important to not consider. So you've got ignore the screen, hashtag ignore the Sentinels, shoot at the manticores, hashtag shoot at the firing base, lock them up, assault as much as you can possibly do, touch, and get into close combat. Number 4 is realize the damage. It is so important, especially when playing Imperial Guard, to appreciate what is hurting you. And math hammers is tough, and to math it all out and blah, blah, blah. But you have to understand what is actually hurting you. And there's a whole bunch of guard variants at the highest competitive level. There's the Scions, there's people who are bringing Tauroxes, there's players like me who are bringing 80 or 90 veteran squads, there's players like Paul who are bringing Basilisks.
And Grey Knights?
screened by Grey Knights, etc. You have to. There's so much emphasis. Number 4 is realize what is hurting you. Target prioritization is so important when playing against Guard. You have to kill the things that are hurting you most. And that brings us to number 5. List design for Guard. If you are a competitive 40k player and you want to win tournaments, you cannot show up and expect to not play them, right? I mean, I think Paul, you and I would definitely agree. You can't just show up and then expect that someone else is going to take care of your Guard problem.
Yeah, and absolutely, man. And I understand that this is maybe kind of sounding a little bit preachy, but we're kind of just trying to lay out what the reality is. We're talking about some very strong facts about 40k tournaments right now, and what we would put real. I want to say real solid money, but like placing real bets on you're not going to go through a tournament without encountering Guard if you're doing well. Because the Guard guys inherently are probably going to be, their lists are going to be doing well, even if they aren't, normally the people that do well. And it's fun. It's not even like a try-hard list to play. It's actually fun to play, and it does well, and you get to play with cool tanks, so you're going to see this kind of stuff exist. So we're just laying it out matter-of-factly in a way that's hopefully easy to kind of digest.
I think that's important to say. I don't mean to sound preachy. I don't mean to sound condescending or anything else like that. It's very much matter of fact. At our local level and then nationally, at every tournament, Guard is an issue. And so you have to account for them. And so number 5 on my checklist is list design for your eventual matchup against these guys. And if you can keep those first 4 things in mind, all of those things are so important to do. You won't regret list designing to beat Guard and to beat those armies.
Yeah, absolutely.
Ultimately, as Paul pointed out, we don't want to sound preachy. We don't want to sound condescending. What we really want to do is have our listeners win those games.
Yeah, and we're talking about essentially 40k gravity. I said, like I've mentioned before, this is just a fact. This is something you will see, and that's why we're talking about it. Because until things, I don't know what would change the fact that this is a dominant list.
Okay, well, I'm glad that you brought up the list building component of this, because especially where we have so many changes coming with the new books that are coming out, do you feel that if you tailor your list to take out Guard, that it will be effective against everything else that's out there? Or are you going to be caught sideways by somebody with a different sort of list design that kind of breaks apart what you imagine would do really well against Guard? I had an experience like this.
Yeah, I can only hearken to what Horton Doughton said. I think that there are some Alpha Legion lists that are so dominant in pure head-to-head matchups against Guard. We had this conversation about how, man, these lists are going to crush Guard. And then my response to Horton was, yeah, you might beat me, but you're probably going to lose against the guy playing Ultramarines with Rowboat. You probably going to lose against, XYZ other lists who are going to be contenders at GTs. Don't exclusively design for Guard because you're going to be left handicapped.
Yeah, is there something you pack in excess only to deal with Guard that would be ineffectual against other lists? And I think that part of that is, yes, if you get matched up against the Orc Horde player in round 1, you're probably going to be questioning everything you just heard.
Yeah, and there's going to be something that I think we need to make sure we remind our listeners, and this is something that we have preached for years, as long as I've been on the show, that when you're building your list, you're building your list to win at the top tables, but you need to have enough tools in your toolbox to get you to that point in the first place.
Well, I absolutely agree with that. Swear by that. A mindset of aggressive play, because some of the things that we've talked about are, we don't need to outline the tenets again, but what they were aspects of really aggressive play to focus on the threats, what the actual real threats, that all boiled down to really having good target priority and threat assessment. And not all of that required having a specific weapon. It required a focus on a play style when you were outgunned. or I guess poorly matched is probably the best way to say it. Outgun is too fine a point on it, but when you were outlisted or in a bad matchup, you need to fall back on some fundamentals of play. And so I think that even if you had some things in there that were more slanted towards dealing with a guard fire base, the fundamentals of the things we talked about will win you games on the whole.
Ultimately, I think that's exactly right. And that was my point in the whole. And if you extrapolate those, they will absolutely help you beat other armies that aren't guard.
And we're going to talk about it. There's more Alpha Legion lists to talk about. There are other, I think the only thing that people like really already have internally in them is like Robute is very good, and anything you put with him is going to be better than it was.
so strong. Rowboat is so strong. Before,
but there's other things that are really good now, and I'm hoping, but we talk about how everything's playable in 8, and really everything is, but there are some things that are more playable, and hopefully that continues to exist as we get more and more codexes. And I think that's going to be fun to dissect over this edition. It's still, we talk about how early it is in the edition in the first part of the show, but it really is early. But in your point about, do you overly build for guard? I don't know that you can overly build for guard that in a way that would disadvantage you against most competitive things out there right now.
I don't think that if you plan for guard, you're going to regret it. Yeah. Wildly unlikely.
The same things that work against guard work against Guilliman too.
Exactly. I mean,
the fire bases are fundamentally made up of the same things, and that is things with lots of wounds and high toughness.
That's exactly right. I mean, my 5-point list, you just change a couple of pronouns, and then it's like, ignore the conscripts, shoot the Razorbacks, and get in close combat, right? Like the fundamental tenets are probably applicable against the rowboat lists.
I completely agree. And I think those things are going to be worth focusing more on as we move forward. And if anyone has any questions about them specifically, please hit them up on us on the Facebook. I do want to briefly mention, and let me find this, completely changing gears. Over here in the States, we've got a huge storm that's moving through the Gulf. And we've been recently, somebody sent us a message today that food banks are also seeking board game donations for people that are sitting around holed up with nothing to do. So if that's something that interests, or if that's something that you would like to take part in, I'm willing to bet that there are several food banks in that Gulf area that are willing to take board games or other forms of entertainment. I wanted to mention that was brought to our attention right before we started the show. And obviously people that are displaced, our heart goes out to you, and hopefully everything returns to normal as soon as possible.
It's kind of funny that you would think of hearing that from someone. Like when I think of a food bank, I wouldn't think that. But when the power's out and you're in a room with a bunch of people and you're sitting there, your phone battery's dead, just having a board with some dice and being able to take your mind off of everything that's going on. I bet that does about as good nourishment to the soul as good food does to the body.
Let's talk about the Finishing Move segment. I'm very happy to say that Frontline Gaming is still a sponsor of the Finishing Move segment. They have chosen to continue their sponsorship with us, and I've really it's been a pleasure talking about them in this segment because they continue to innovate and bring out new products. And it's not just 4x6 mats for 40k. They've also got 4x4, 3x3 mats for basically every gaming system, and their terrain is incredibly functional in 8. I just built a couple of their urban buildings, and without much effort at all, I'm able to get them ready for the tabletop, and they're functional. They've got the appropriate ratio, I think, of area terrain to obscurement, and pretty much right out of the box.
And line of sight blocking is more important now than it ever has been. I really think that the large square buildings and having terrain features like that is going to improve the game experience for everybody.
It's very subtle, or until you play with it a few times, it could easily be something that fades into the background in your mind, but it really does help the overall enjoyment of the game. And I don't even mind saying, I find something pretty satisfactory about working with wood glue. It's a very satisfying feel to me.
I mean, when you work with wood glue, it's not really going to come off.
Yeah, it's pretty solid. But anyway, I like it. I like their stuff. They did recently put out that really cool new the Chaos Star type theme mat. If you have not checked them out recently, their terrain series, all the instructions, like you can even look at it before you get it. You could look at what it's going to take to put it together. And they all go together very easily with very easy to follow instructions. And again, I liked working with the wood glue. I'm going to do some more. It's been fun.
Sweet.
Yeah, so the hobby segment today, we got a question. It might have been a week or so ago about, because we often say seal your model as part of the steps of the processes that we're talking about. Like you want to seal to protect the work that you've done before you go on to your next step. And we got the question like from a guy who said, is it okay to paint over sealer? I didn't know I could do that. I may have butchered the question, but that's the intent. He was unsure about painting over a sealed surface. And my response is you definitely can. And in some cases, I think that you should. And so the finishing move I want to talk about in this segment is about different types of finishes, what it will actually do for the next step that you plan on doing for the model.
Right, because there's several important steps that you need to consider when you're looking at a project long term, especially when you're getting to some of the more advanced weathering techniques that use powders and things like that, or things that involve the use of like a wire brush, for example, to scrape off of like chips of paint off of a tank or something like that. And when you seal your model is going to really have a big effect on that, and it's also going to change how the model appears depending on the type of sealer that you use.
Listen to you coming in high tech.
I know.
I was going to take us
right?
on back to like just the real basics. But what you're saying is exactly right. What you do before and after the sealer will have a big effect on some of those techniques that you're talking about, like weathering and the chipping and whatever. What shows through under the sealer and what's on top of whatever comes after that has a big impact on the not only the visual aspect of it, but the texture of the model.
And where I was going with that was just saying, have a plan for that when you start painting the model. Know at what point you need to put that on, and that's going to solve a lot of the concern for that.
Yeah, absolutely. I was just going to talk about the finish of the model and how it can affect things like washes. Like, let's just say you might have a need to paint 60 or 70 poxwalkers for a tournament that's this weekend.
Hypothetically.
Yeah, right. Or you didn't want to take unpainted models to the ATC, so you slapped some paint on things, and you only had about a day and a half to do these 60 poxwalkers. Let's just say that as a hypothetical. Now,
if only those things actually spread like bacteria, it would be easier.
Right. I went to Home Depot and I got 2 cans of spray paint. I did not know this. Again, I was in a hurry. I found just a color. I looked at the color. I found colors that I wanted. I wanted a really light, almost like pale ivory color, and then more of a tan color. And I knew that I'm going to put a purple wash over the ivory, and I'm going to put a green wash over the more tan color, and 80% of my model is going to be done. And I knew that. But I knew in my mind what I wanted to look at. I didn't look at the finish of the cans. My mistake, right? But I brought home a matte finish and a gloss finish on the 2 respective colors. So, what does that matter? Why does it even matter? Because I'm going to eventually be sealing them with something consistent with the rest of the army anyway, right? Well, during the painting stage, remember this was going on as my base coat and primer all in one, with a color that I was going to quickly apply a shade over. Well, on the gloss paint, the shade is going to crawl more into the recesses and not spend hardly any time on the surfaces. It won't dry on the more raised or exposed surfaces unless you put a ton on. Heck, with a gloss finish, it might sometimes just run right off the model. You've got to kind of babysit both of these things. So there's not this
like Teflon.
Yeah, I mean this is not something that doesn't require some type of skill or knowledge or talent, but both of these techniques are fast. So with the gloss, you're going to get more something, hopefully, that you collect in the recesses, leaving that base color more exposed up on the surfaces. With the matte, or sometimes even a satin, depending on the type of satin finish it is, the wash and the shades will collect more easily on the flat surfaces. So it's like putting the original Devlin mud on a model. It's going to coat the whole thing, and that whole thing's going to have that brown tint the whole way. But that's one of the reasons why the gloss Devlin or Agrax Earth or shade now, and the Null Noel, it's the gloss shade wash will flow more into the recesses. But if you're going onto a flat surface with a normal acrylic matte varnish or matte wash, it's going to hug onto the flat surfaces where it will more easily roll off of the gloss. So depending on how you want your model to look, you're going to want to choose one of those two things. If you want things to appear with the matte, it's going to hug everything. You're going to get a tint over the whole thing. With the gloss, it's going to go into the recesses. With the satin, I consider the satin the more neutral, more in between of those three things. So I wanted to cover that. Can you paint over? Yes, you definitely should. You can and you should sometimes, but the finish will affect how the paint behaves.
Right. And if you're going to paint on top of it, don't paint right after you put the finish on.
Oh, for sure.
You want to make sure that has time to cure.
Yeah, and depending on the overall humidity in your environment, it could take a while. I mean, I'm talking about like 30 minutes, an hour, several hours, depending on where you are. It's going to be different, and you're going to know that. But that also dictates how much you have to shake the can up, and if you're going to cloud the miniature before you spray it on there, and that's big. Test, and if you see if you cloud up a miniature, do not spray it on something that you want to work on. There's a way to fix it if it clouds, but you have to have gloss varnish to do it. There's a trick. If something clouds up, you can gloss it, and then you can come back in at a more opportune time to seal it with the other. But even my different armies over the years, they've got different finishes on them, and some people don't care. Some people really care. But next to my where my finishing table is, I have the three different varnishes. I've got a matte finish, a satin finish, and a gloss finish. I rarely ever use the gloss unless I'm wanting that paint to behave the way we described it. I typically go with a satin sealer on my miniatures, but if I'm using it as a middle step, then it's completely dependent upon what I want, how I want the paint to behave for the rest of the duration of the whatever it is effect I'm trying to go for. Yeah,
when you know the next step, it'll inform your decision on what you want to use.
Yeah, I think it dictates it. You should use it, and if you don't have it, you don't have to get the high dollar fancy paint from the hobby store. Support your hobby store, buy everything there, but the varnish or the sealers you get from Home Depot and Walmart work basically the same way.
Yeah, you don't need a special brand per se to pull off the effect that you're trying to get. And another thing to remember too with the sealers is that just because you seal something, if it ends up being that you want to strip the model later for whatever reason, if something gets really messed up, you're still going to be able to do that. The sealer isn't going to prevent that.
Yeah, so that was the question. Can you paint over sealer? Absolutely. It's but use it as a tool. You can use it as more than just a finish or a sealer for your models. You can use it as a very important painting technique on miniatures. And you brought up weathering before. My Adeptus Mechanicus that are all weathered, I lay down all the splotches, and we've talked about it before that the various chipping mediums. Before you put down that chipping medium, you want to seal the miniature itself. And yeah, it's not going to do anything to it's not going to prevent you from painting. It just may change how the paint behaves. So know that going into it, what you want your desired effect to be. That's all I got.
Yeah, I think that's good advice. And it's something that, I didn't seal miniatures for years, and I didn't think about matte, gloss, or satin until I just bought the can that my friend said, hey, this is good, get this, without really thinking about it. So having this conversation, I think, is going to be very informative for a lot of people.
I'm pretty sure that the Games Workshop Purity Seal is a satin varnish. Don't quote me on that. It may say that on the description, but that is it's a good finish. It's a good varnish, and that is what I consider to be the neutral, what will reflect very well in most lights, because that's what you're really doing. You're trying to control how the light affects, in addition to protecting the paint job on your model. You're trying to control the way it looks in all conditions. I know a lot of people also use the tester model like the lusterless Model Masters. I have a can of that too. That stuff normally works very reliably. Real happy with how that goes. But there's a ton of different ways you can go about it.
Cool.
Andrew, Chris, you guys have a good rest of your night. Look for pictures from the various conventions. If you guys are at Nova, snap some shots of your games. Send us to us on Facebook. We'll put them on our wall if you send them. And I'm going to be posting up some pictures and videos from DragonCon.
Awesome. Looking forward to it.
You guys have a good rest of your night.
I am your father.